Hello and welcome to another geopolitics and international relations vlog. And in today's vlog, I have joined by Dr. Layne Hertsell. He is the research professor and associated with the Asia Institute, Tokyo, Berlin. And his areas are the energy economy and the environment. Thank you very much, Dr. Layne Hertsell, to joining me.
Good morning.
Good morning. So the topic which I just breaking down and we will discuss it. I am not an expert on this, but I think that we could discuss about your expertise and your knowledge on this subject. That is quite around the headlines we have been listening. So tell me about this. What is this Fukushima nuclear wastewater that is going to be dumping into the sea? And we saw there is a lot of protest around. We saw the protest in Fiji, in South Korea, and other countries. They are protesting about this, and they are expressing their concerns that this is something like the risky or whatever be there. So how you break it down?
Yeah, well, I work on science, technology, and society, so the area is the 3E. I'm not an atomic physicist or chemist, but what we look at in science, technology, and society is how all of this fits together. So in the current situation where the public is getting or is riled up, they're concerned about the release of what they see as toxic water. In this case, it's tritium-laced water and so forth from those reactors or those meltdown reactors that were at Sendai at Fukushima Daiichi. The IAEA did a report on this. It's about 2 years long report, and there's no real scientific evidence that this is a serious problem. In fact, they should have released the water long before now. So basically, the tritium is just like a kind of heavy water. So there's a hydrogen and it has a proton, but in the case of deuterium or tritium, it has neutrons and makes it heavier and so forth. It's not quite as radioactive as some of the other ones, like something like strontium, for example, that can get in the bones. It mimics cesium. It mimics calcium, and then cesium is the other one, like you get with the X-ray when you go to the doctor. All right, so the water that they're putting out into the ocean, it's sitting in those tanks. So if you look at the picture, like say the Financial Times, I have the picture in front of me. They have those white tanks sitting over there where they're putting water, where they spray the core, the fuel. They have those fuel rods that are in the core of the reactors, because those will continue on going through the reaction for some time, and you have to cool those down. If not, then you have another explosion and meltdown and all that, and that's what they're really concerned about. So you have to keep these cool. What they're doing is they're running that water through a kilometer-long pipe to mix it, to dilute it, and then before they dump it into the ocean.
So Greenpeace has expressed, I think, a lot of concerns about this, about the Fukushima nuclear water release. So what are their concerns? Mean that they say there are, because they say that Japan has chosen a cheap method to discharge this water. So what they mean, what is the cheap and what is the expensive way to discharge this water?
Well, yeah, I can understand. Well, there's a number of criticisms, right? So this kind of thing is just an absolute catastrophe. It's a tragedy. There's only the risk of having a nuclear meltdown like this, and if you look at what the atomic chemists and physicists say, it's one in every 2,500 years. So that's all of Western civilization as we know it. Of course, it goes back farther, Western civilization, but you're supposed to have the risk of one meltdown every 2,500 years. That's pretty good odds. However, we've had something like 5 meltdowns in up to the Fukushima, maybe like 35 years. So 5 meltdowns in 35 years. That's pretty bad. So the question is, how much of that is the science, such as that what we don't understand about nuclear physics, and it's really up to the physicists to make those decisions. And then of course policy decisions, and that's public matter, right? So people have influence on government, or they should, and we should determine together how techniques occur, which means the manner of how a technology is applied. Now, in this in this conundrum, in this situation, is where the Fukushima problem happened. Of course, anytime you have a nuclear reaction, such as in a nuclear power plant, these are always very serious processes, right? However, at the same time, there's policies around it, and then there's also other mechanical aspects of a plant, including how they cool it. And they have these pumps that will cool the plant, and this is where the failure was in the Daiichi plant. So you had a geoseismic event. You had this earthquake off the coast of the Sendai in 2011, March of 2011. That wasn't such a problem, but the tsunami knocked out the cooling system of the plant. And so what they did is they went into a kind of controlled explosion. That was an intentional explosion, because if they had waited and just let it melt down, you would have had radiation sprayed all over, including into Tokyo, which is a megapolis. It's probably, I suppose, in the Tokyo area by now, it's 25 million people or something, in that region. So it's very, very serious. At the time, they had plans to evacuate Tokyo.
Yeah. So this process, I think, as I read it, this discharge will be goes, I think, like 40 to 50 years. I think they are putting it into the parts. So do you think that the future dynamics of the climate change and the oceanic and something like this, if it would be changed, what could be the risk and what could be the difficulties for the Japan? Because we see that the climate is getting more aggressive, especially the climate change and all this kind of the phenomena are getting more strong, and the implementation by the international bodies is getting more strict. So do you think that in future Japan could face any kind of the this kind of the more some legal battles?
Okay, let me finish up that last question, because for your listeners may be interested in hearing just a little bit of that, and then I can answer this matter about climate change and what's coming, which is very serious. In the other case, the issue really is about with national systems and national sovereignty, and also national security. It's hard for scientists and outsiders to see into a system. So what will happen is, in any state is going to do this, they're just going to close down all the information. It's going to be hard to get information out. It doesn't matter whether it's a democracy or not. This is what happens. So in the case of in TEPCO, which is, they didn't follow the rules. This goes back to the 60s. Long, these reactors are old. The reactors are extended over their lifespan, so they're supposed to be shut down 20 years ago, and they're still in operation. That all gets to be a problem. So there's a kind of corporate, the corruption and all this kind of stuff that happens in governments. That's the problem, and with the current situation. So what we do is we rely on the nuclear chemist and the nuclear physicist, because we know what mathematics and physics follow, and we can determine from them what is actually going on there through the physical processes, without having to know what the policies are or what people are reporting. And there are some reports of measurements that are coming out, because they are having to measure it. As I said, the UN is involved, the IAEA, and so forth. So this is where a lot of people are concerned about, because they think they're not getting accurate information, which they aren't. But the physicists and the chemists, they know, and they can extrapolate what's going on there. But now, in the case of what's coming, this will, tritium, especially in the water, will be around for a long time. They've run out of space to store the water in those tanks. Now, the problem is not so much tritium and so forth, but and this is why I said they should have released the water earlier. If another earthquake were to strike there, you wouldn't need a tsunami this time. It would just be an earthquake. It could destroy that installation, that power plant installation that's already demolished. That would be a problem, because then you could have explosions and so forth, and fuel rods and this kind of thing. That water wouldn't be diluted when it goes into the ocean. So this is a real concern, and that's what I would be concerned about for the future. The same thing with maybe there's some kind of climate unknowns that we can't see right now that could also affect it. I don't know.
Being an energy expert, what was your thinking? Mean that how you think that Japan should use and adopt the policy or strategy to dispose of this water?
Right. So the physicists are the experts in the energy. My area can look at society, which is what you're concerned about, and what I think people listening. The issue is really about policy and international policy in these cases because this can affect everybody. It's similar to something like war. The war in Eurasia should concern everybody on the planet because if that were to go into a nuclear confrontation, then you would have contamination going on. And the same thing with or Zaporizhzhia, the power plant there in Ukraine. Same thing with Fukushima. The cooling systems could go wrong. We almost had a meltdown in Iowa. I think it was a couple of years ago. The care and maintenance and due diligence are not being done at the levels that the physicists would say that they should be done, and this is the problem. Now we can get into whether we should even have nuclear power and all that, but I'm just giving the landscape of what we see in what we would call techniques, application.
So you also look into the environment, and I think that I saw the trending of this issue. So we did not see much from the Western and especially from the U.S. side, the environmental experts or who are the activists about the environment. They did not condemn this Japanese kind of stuff. So why? Why you think this kind of the division among this into the international players? What do you think?
You mean what international players do you mean? Do you mean the activists in the
International
States?
environmental activists who talk a lot about the environment and climate, but they are silent on this like Fukushima issue.
Well, the Japanese people have fought this. I think people died as activists fighting against these installations in Japan. Okay, so first of all, some background is that Japan is located in what we call the Ring of Fire, which is this massive volcanic ring that goes around the Pacific area and down into South America. You'll know about Chile and other places. Okay, so high volcanic activity, what they call the reality of geoscience compared to the myth of safety. So myth of safety is what I'm talking about compared to the actual on-the-ground geoscience. At the end of World War II, Japan was faced with a dilemma. So if they wanted to be fairly as independent as they could, and Japanese have always wanted to be independent in their own island and so forth, or their islands, they were dependent on oil imports because they don't have a lot of energy. So what they did is and they still do, and they imported some, of course, because they were rebuilding, but they instituted nuclear power plants. And that's why you see so much there and in Japan and so much politics around it. But the Japanese people have fought these tooth and nail, dying to prevent this kind of stuff from happening. Sure. Now, as far as the worldwide activists, I've seen some in the news. It's you can't tell with the mainstream media because they will show you certain things that they might want to play up for whatever agendas they have. But I think that there is a fairly active, organizing and then influence in the politics and all of that. But I think personally, from what I can see, that there needs to be a lot more democratization through the UN. We have the international bodies in place. We have the UN has the human rights. It has the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Association, and so on. All of this is in place. These should be pressed by regular people. It's our responsibility. And something like right at first, something like 19 or 20,000 people died there in that particular tragedy. And then, of course, that in the immediate effects of the explosions there were meltdowns. There's iodine. Okay, so iodine poisoning that lasts about a week. That can be deadly. And then strontium and cesium and so forth, as I mentioned. So there's a lot of death and suffering coming from that. And from a preventable science and policy, just absolute catastrophe.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Layne Hertsell, for your thoughtful and very informative information and insight on this Fukushima. Thank you very much for joining me.
It's a pleasure.